Hello, everyone. Today I am going to be reviewing an album that has been requested for me to discuss and review for a little bit now. And it's an artist that I have been very slow to warm up to and sink my teeth into. And this review is going to be a little bit more unusual from previous reviews that I've done, in that because of this artist being somewhat new on my radar, even though they've been around for quite some time, I'm actually kind of listening to a lot of these songs for in a few cases, the first time while I'm filming this review. Obviously, I'm going to edit those parts out. I'm sorry, this isn't going to be like a reaction. I really can't escape the copyright issues that brings up, and I need to be able to monetize these videos. I'm sorry. So this will be me talking about my thoughts after I hear each of these songs. Some of the songs I have already heard, so some of them I will have been a little more familiar with, but just bear in mind, this really is sort of like a first reaction, first listen kind of video for me, because unfortunately I just never really saw the time for me to sit down and listen to it the full way through. I'd listened to half of this record way back, like when her most recent album came out. And of course, I am talking about, the title implies, Fiona Apple. I'm talking about her debut album, Tidal, which was released on July 23rd, 1996, almost exactly 24 years ago. And so I am finally going to give what is considered the quintessential Fiona Apple record its dues. And like I had said, I'd listened to half of this record back when Fetch the Bolt Cutters came out in April. And because I thought I was going to be filming this video back then, and then things just got carried away and I just didn't get around to it. And I was like, I have to sit down and I have to do this. And I knew that if I was going to wait until I sat down and listened to the album before and get familiar with it, I just was never going to film this video. Because I will say this, Fiona Apple might be an acquired taste for a lot of people. And as a songwriter, I give her all of the chops, all of the credit, and also because her vocals are very, very silky, very, very interesting to listen to. But when it comes to the musical style, it's not always right up my alley. So there's definitely been a bit of me that's sort of like, I don't want to say reluctant to listen to her music, but it's just a fact of nature that I tend to be drawn to things that are a little flashier or a little wrapped in a bit more of a ethereal kind of esoteric shroud. And artists like Fiona Apple and Alanis Morissette and some Sarah McLachlan that I still need to get into, and like Liz Phair and like all of those 90s alternative rock artists, female artists that I really want to cover on this channel. I've been very reluctant to get into their music because I feel like I'm prejudging it before I've heard it as something I've heard before. It's like, I know it's going to be good, but it's just not really going to be my style. But I'm trying to break that down. And when I first listened to Tidal, there was one song that instantly jumped out at me. And I will discuss which one that is as I go through this track list. But I hope that in doing this listen, there's going to be more songs that jump out at me instead of just one that I will want to come back to and like put on my playlists and stuff. Because I really did love Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I actually hadn't listened to it for almost like 2 months until a couple days ago. And then I listened to most of the songs on that album. And I was just like, wow, I'm so glad I invested the time into that artist, because I was a little worried that it was all for me. Like, oh, I feel like I have to cover this artist because she's really big and she's making an album and putting it out. And then I'm going to not really actually be that into it like a couple months later. And I think I am starting to really find an affinity for Fiona's music. Of course, I've only heard Fetch the Bolt Cutters, and now I'm going back to her debut in 96. So, I've heard there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. Obviously, there's some maturing that goes on. And I feel like this earlier stuff of hers is going to be very kind of full of this punk energy. And I think it'll be interesting to tap into. I'm really intrigued by the album cover as well. It's just really focusing on those gorgeous light blue eyes of hers. And the cropping of the image of her face, I think, is very interesting. In that it's a bit uncanny. And so I'm definitely getting an up close and personal expose kind of vibe. But also, the title of Tidal is making me think of water. And of course, there's one song that comes to mind right now. Yes, I'm thinking of Sullen Girl, which is the song that really stuck out to me from this record. And so I am thinking about, and it's calm under the waves in the blue of my oblivion. I feel like that's probably going to be a thesis statement for this record as I listen to it. And Sullen Girl, no matter what I think about the rest of this record, I love that song. So I'm hoping that the other songs live up to it. Because, like I said, I've heard some of them. The first half of this album I've heard one time, and then I've heard Sullen Girl a ton, and then the latter half I have not heard at all yet. So let's dive into this and see what I think about the first track, which is titled Sleep to Dream. Okay, well, Sleep to Dream, it's funny, I had heard this song only once before, but as soon as it kicked into the chorus, I was like, I already knew the song. It's got a very jazzy, it really does remind me of Emily Autumn. And Emily Autumn, I remember when I got into her music, and I've reviewed her on this channel, well, one of her albums, her debut as well. Everyone talked about comparing her vocal style to Fiona Apple, and I'm now seeing that. I'm like, wow, this does kind of sound like an Emily Autumn song. Even the melody of it, this kind of bluesy, jazzy, husky female voice kind of delivery with a very sort of live band percussion instrumental kind of thing going on. There's some atmospheric, moody ambient stuff it really feels like a storm kind of building in the background. And so the song feels very anxious, and there's definitely I got the idea that there's just so much pent up rage beneath the surface. So that comes through a lot, and lyrically, you got your head in the clouds, and you're not at all what you seem. As much as I think that it's mostly talking to a partner or an ex-partner, saying, so don't forget what I told you, don't come around, I got my own hell to raise, stay away from me here, like I've got to find my own independence from you. But the way I like to interpret things, I always take it to another level and interpret it as sort of someone talking to parts of themselves. And the more I look at the lyrics, I'm like, no, this is definitely about a relationship. Even the idea of I don't go to sleep to dream means that, basically when I'm around you, I'm wanting to think about something else, because being around you is just so stifling, as she says in the lyrics, and I can't abide anymore. And so now I dream while I'm awake, because the reality I'm in is just, I got to get out of here. I think that's really where this song is going. But I always like to take it to this certain extra level where I think of it as, you telling a part of yourself that has been stuck, in old habits and trying to sabotage everything in your life, just basically saying, like, I'm emancipating myself from those parts of myself that are holding me down, or those parts of myself that are causing me to chase relationships that do not serve me, that end up getting me in these kinds of situations. And really, it's just those lyrics in the chorus that make me think of this being a little bit more like a meta interpersonal conversation. But at the end of the day, it's about emancipating yourself from someone who is holding you down. And that leads us into Sullen Girl, which I do not need to listen to because I've heard it so many times now, because I am in love with this song. The second song is this sweeping piano ballad, very, very raw, open, and honest. And she's singing about something that is extremely personal and difficult. That was traumatizing for her when she was 12, being raped. And she talks about, as hard as that experience was, and as much as she's still processing that, that is also something that taught her the kind of inner strength at probably such a young age that she is almost grateful to have been able to tap into, and to be able to learn how to deal with pain and process it, and be a little bit ahead of the game there. And she also talks about this also having a lot to do with just the mental state that she was in while she was writing this record, which, remember, she was only like 17, 18 when this album was written and coming out. Some of these songs might have been written when she was even younger than that. Days like this, I don't know what to do with myself. All day and all night, I wander the halls along the walls, and under my breath, I say to myself, I need fuel to take flight. Verse 2 is that why they call me a sullen girl. They don't know I used to sail the deep and tranquil sea, but he washed me sure, and he took my pearl and left an empty shell of me. Now that's obviously referencing that rape. And there's definitely, a reflection on people maybe not knowing that story, but even if they do kind of falsely judging her as being aloof or withdrawn or having a hard time opening up to people. And that is making her come across very, yeah, confrontational in a way. And she's trying to explain that, wasn't always this way. It's, life experiences can really kind of make you build these walls. The chorus, and there's too much going on, but it's calm under the waves in the blue of my oblivion. And really, like I said earlier, this is the thesis statement for me. I think that subsuming yourself into the melancholia of past trauma, existential confusion, the teenage angst that we all go through at that time. It's the kind of lyrics that I would write. So I feel it 100%, and especially stripping it down with just a rolling piano. It gives it feeling a little bit like Wayward at Sea feeling because the chords just rise and fall. It's a really hitting song, and one that on so many levels just speaks to the fraught nature of existence, and especially for anyone, but particularly young girls who have gone through sexual assault or any kind of form of harassment or being mistreated. But it's the kind of universal message kind of song of just what depression can feel like, what being defeated can really feel like, and how bittersweet that can be, because it's comforting to be under those waves sometimes, because it's all we've ever known for so long. Okay, so track number 3, Shadow Boxer, was the lead single, the first song that the world ever heard from Fiona. And I think instantly what I was reading and what I got was definitely really strong vocal dynamics. I mean, it was a great, I think, way to set the scene about what she could do vocally. I really like the metaphor of being a boxer, shadow boxer, when talking about a boyfriend that she talks about, someone who she was kind of like had an unhealthy affinity for. He was kind of coy about being a friend for as long as it felt convenient for him. And then he would try and make a move on her when she was least expecting it and she let her guard down. And then it was like, don't ruin the friendship here. Like, now I have to separate myself from you. And then he wants to be friends again, way back. It keeps going back and forth, and they felt like they were doing this dance. And so she basically just wrote this song as a tribute to saying, like, I feel like I'm boxing with a shadow here. I don't know where you're going to make your move, so I'm swinging all around me, as she sings in the lyrics. And yeah, I mean, I see the sort of the way she delivers the lyrics. It's lackadaisical. It's sort of sensual in a way, but like there's a sarcasm that's just dripping off the page. In the way she describes, your gaze is dangerous, and you fill your space so sweet. If you let get too close, you'll set your spell on me. And you can tell by the way she's delivering these lyrics that like it's not supposed to be an endearing statement. Like this is you're a problem. Like you can tell. Yeah, it's okay melodically, but I mean it's very bluesy alternative with piano. Like I'm okay with it, not like madly in love with it or anything. I think the verses stand out more for me melodically. That's just my opinion. Track number 4, Criminal, was her biggest hit. And it is a song I'd heard before. It's definitely a song that I would need a little bit more time to warm up to melodically. Again, I'm getting Emily Autumn vibes. I'm just going to keep bringing that up. But yeah, this, from what I'm gathering from the whole image and picture here and hearing about the music video, which was controversial because there were these sedated or tranquilized models all around her. There were accusations of child pornography, which, I don't know if that alludes to the fact that maybe she probably was older than 18 when this video was filmed. I'm not sure. There were a lot of overtones that made some people uncomfortable, and that had a lot to do with the fact that at 1998 Grammy Awards, she gave that best rock song acceptance speech, and she basically told everyone off, which kind of unfortunately in the mainstream did derail her career. Back then, especially if you're the female punk artist, there's a niche for you there, but if you're at the Grammys, like they're not going to want to deal with you if you're going to be dropping F-bombs on live TV. It's just unfortunate, and so it's just sad because I really do feel like a male artist would have been able to get away with that a lot more. But People want these female artists to be squeaky clean. And so, yeah, Criminal is sort of, it's interesting that this song was sort of like what, in a way, made her almost become sort of like a criminal to the media. I think interestingly, because she's talking about how she feels complicit in participating in the culture of pop culture, which is so much about sexualizing the female body. And in this instance, for this song, she was, I think, probably the least organically led to writing this song. It was more of like record labels and executives like sitting down and saying, "We need a hit," and so she just like was like, "Well, I'll give you a hit, but it's gonna be, it's gonna be social commentary, and it might go over your heads, but this song is gonna be making fun of and pointing at the hypocrisy and like the terribleness of the Hollywood system." So it's pretty genius, I think. But it's not the kind of song I would normally listen to, just in terms of like the sonic elements of it. There's some definitely some guitar presence on this track. And Yeah, I I think that I can see why it was a single. I think that it encapsulated the alt rock sound of the '90s pretty strongly, I think. And There's definitely some memorable lyrics in there, particularly in some of the verses. And But yeah, not my favorite. Track 5, Slow Like Honey. This has such a smooth jazz feel to it. I love the instrument. I think it's called a vibraphone. It's this chiming, kind of interesting instrumental that kind of comes in. You hear a lot in smooth jazz. She has such a Nina Simone kind of like rich, silky, just like think. It makes me think of like a bubble bath kind of vocal, and there's a sensuality to obviously the metaphor about slow like honey. There's still a melancholia to this track because even though it's very sensual, she talks about, when fantasy and reality lie too far apart. I stretch myself across like a bridge and pull you to the edge. There's a feeling of like not quite achieving the fantasy in your dreams that you would like from the reality you live in, maybe within a relationship. And she sings in verse 5, "And stand there waiting, trying to attain the end to satisfy the story. Shall I release you? Must I release you as I rise to meet your glory?" So much of this it really does feel like late night, sensual, kind of melancholic, lovelorn poetry, describing a fantasy of a person. Maybe it's someone you haven't even met. Maybe it's just like a sex fantasy or something. Or it could be something more than that. Just that creeps into your thoughts, particularly late at night, and seeps like honey. I love she talks about in herself making herself slow like honey to reach out and embrace this fantasy. And I think that the idea of being slow like honey is counterbalanced with the other part of that refrain, which is heavy with mood. And those two lines, I think, are so artfully constructed as poetry to describe a feeling of a heaviness around, or like a hazy kind of weighted emotional fantasy that's tied up in romance or sex. And I like meditating on that line a lot. So I think that just will stick out to me and make this song more than the sum of its parts for me. Because I mean, melodically, I have nothing to fault it for, although it's definitely a sleepy song. You kind of forget it's going on and it just keeps going. It's a bit longer too. But it brings me back into the moment, understanding the mental space of the person who's writing it, of Fiona when she wrote it. And I mean, I'm just really, really impressed by these lyrics for someone who's 16, 17 writing these lyrics. Um, it shows what a wordsmith she is and how intelligent she is with her wordplay. And at such a young age, I just think that, you don't usually see that until maybe they're a little bit more into their career and they've practiced a little bit more with songwriting. So, because it's so adult. In a way, it almost feels like something someone maybe in their like 40s might write. And I keep having to remind myself, even her vocal delivery makes it sound like she's kind of already in her like 30s, 40s. And I have to remind myself that this was a 16, 17, 18-year-old girl, basically. Like it just, there's a little bit of a disconnect there for me. And I'm pretty amazed by it. So wow. Wow. Track number 6, The First Taste. I think it's the perfect sort of song to put right after slow, like Honey, because it's kind of playing off of this same late night sexual fantasy. um, First of all, I was really thrown off by the tempo change. We start out like in the same kind of very slow, deliberate, sensual energy of the previous track. And then we take things to a little bit of a Caribbean island vibe with the mid tempo, with the marimba instrumental coming in. And I'm really mesmerized by the sonic elements, but I'm also just like lyrically, this song I think it's very much speaking about, feeling trepidatious, but like knowing this fantasy in your head of this romance, maybe someone you've been lusting after for so long. It's eating away at you for so long that you're just like, when you're beating yourself up. And but you're trying to at the same time not, break the fantasy of the first time that you finally get to connect and finally act on all those emotions that have been pent up inside of you for so long. Heaven cannot wait forever. Darling, just start the chase. Now, this is so personal for me because I feel often like I am the one who has to do so much of the heavy lifting when I'm trying to start a relationship with someone. And it can get very frustrating. And a lot of the time, we're feminine presenting people like us, or tends to be women, but not always. We tend to not like to make the first step on a lot of these things. Like the person who comes off a little bit more assertive. We tend to want them to show their affection first, then we can reciprocate. And saying "I love you" is always a big thing, and so it can really kind of psychologically damage you if you're feeling like you're a little hesitant to make that first move yourself because you're not quite sure where they are. And of course, you're terrified of bringing it up because it could be a very disappointing moment where it could break the romance completely. And you don't want to be the person who starts that. But at a certain point, you have to step up. And I find that I often do find myself at a point where the tension is becoming too, um, I can't handle it very easily. So I find myself having to break that wall the first time, and usually not great success. But there is, again, a sentiment of I'll let you win, but you must make the endeavor. Meaning, I mean, I can only do so much to carry this relationship. And if you're just sort of hanging around because you think it's fun, and maybe I enjoy, on the surface, just like the time we spend together, but I want more from it, and you're not really thinking in that headspace, then like we need to address this. Is probably going to be a problem. And also, I really, really love the part in the middle of the song where she kind of breaks it down for us, saying, "Full is not heavy as empty, not nearly my love. Full is not as heavy as empty." I mean, what a wonderful lyric that I would like, stitched on a pillow. I mean, it really speaks to the frustration that a love that doesn't feel like it's fully connecting can build up to become. And it really is about reciprocation, and that energy is just not flowing in the right direction. So it must be, and it does make you feel like you're longing to be filled up with. You feel like it's being withdrawn from you the more you're longing to be filled up with all of those things from love. Definitely some sensual undertones there that I get from some of the aspects of this song pertaining to sex. Apparently, there was a music video. I'd be very interested to watch that, because I could see it being very sensual in a lot of ways that I think could be interesting. Um, I'm loving this sort of late night sexual fantasy thing. It's very liberated, it feels very liberated. Even though it's singing about feeling chained to these desires that maybe you'd rather not be, but I can definitely relate to that. Track number 7, Never Is a Promise. Wow. That was, well, Well, that was more of what I was hoping I would hear of on this record because Solemn Girl, but even more devastating in a way. I mean, the orchestration I was really pleasantly surprised by. Once again, I'm just floored that she wrote this when she was 16. I don't know if I think the standard or something in my head is just really low for what I think that like teenagers can write because I need to remember that like there are some phenomenal, songs that have been written by like people, predominantly women at that age, but it doesn't feel like in this day and age, we've got Billie Eilish, but yeah, I don't know. It really, wow. She sounds like she's at least 20 years older than that. Or, I don't know. I mean, um, it's so transcendent of the type of music that I think most people would be making at that age, in terms of the instruments used in the slow, sort of deliberate, over emotional delivery. So this was one of the first songs that was on a demo tape that she sent to the Sony Music exec, that later signed her to her record label. So obviously they heard this song and were like, wow. And I don't blame them, because this was definitely Elton John kind of something at the piano, like something magical happening kind of moment. And so it does remind me of your song a little bit. You'll say, don't fear your dreams. It's easier than it seems. You'll say you'd never let me fall from hope so high, but never is a promise, and you can't afford to lie. It seems like often most people can afford to lie, especially when it comes to love and to relationships. And, there's something definitely, if anything, I can definitely see, the perspective of someone who's new to love and new to romance, sort of really diving into that sort of mentality of like, true love is definitely out there, and love is this, this powerful thing that, like, definitely is not maybe viewed from as nuanced of a perspective as you would when you're so young. And so this very, very romantic line, but it's so devastatingly romantic in a way, because you know that the guy she's singing about did. And that I think that she thinks about this song being about the boy she lost her virginity to. And it's just, an experience that I think most of us can relate to. The first time usually ends up, we think it's our true love, or maybe we don't. But if we do, they usually don't end up being the person we end up with. And when they break up with us, it's usually the first big breakup. And it's just, it really a gut wrenching experience. And she translates that and that emotion of that heartbreak, and, taking this sort of high road, but also saying, like, morally, you screwed up. Like, you lied to me. And sort of taking the position of like, well, it's more than just, okay, maybe you weren't really that into me. It's sort of like you sold me this fantasy, and I bought it because I'm such a sucker for fantasy, and you threw me for a loop, and how dare you. And this is just, again, a cautionary tale to people. Be very, very careful about what you say, especially in the early stages of a relationship, because people like me, people like Fiona, we really take to heart, a lot of promises that really get us excited, and maybe we shouldn't be, you know, uh, being sold something that we actually might not be able to see a return on. I love the title too. I mean, it's so powerful. It just really sits with you and makes you think about just how cruel relationships can be. Oh gosh, yeah. You'll never see the courage I know. Its color's richness won't appear within your view. I'll never glow the way that you glow. Your presence dominates the judgments made on you. I also think that lyric has a lot to do with referencing, what she went through as, a preteen, and like keeping that really close to her heart, and maybe like kind of being a little realizing like this person wasn't like, it's so frustrating how this person seems to get away with so much when there's so many double standards that I feel are being cast upon me as being like a woman, and feeling like, I can't speak up about my sexual assault, or feeling like I'll be blamed for it. Like there's a lot of undertones of like sexism there. Like, your presence dominates the judgments made on you. Well, she she gets judgments thrown on without her presence there. It's like sort of like being male, you have that privilege of being able to sort of own your judgments. People make their judgments based on literally what they see of you, and it's not so insidious and sort of like based on stereotypes and based on like, hearsay and gossip. I don't know, that's just me extrapolating here. But definitely one of my favorite songs I've heard so far on this record. On The Child Is Gone, I am once again just really, just talk about someone who had to grow up so fast. Because it's true that at that very vulnerable age of being a teenager, you are sort of like losing your innocence and you are learning to be more independent, and it can be very scary. I mean, I've been a lot even later in, in the game with that. For me, it was more my early 20s when I started to really experience this. um, Darling, give me your absence tonight. Take the shade from the canvas and leave me the white. Let me sink in the silence that echoes inside, and don't bother leaving the light on. Because I suddenly feel like a different person. From the roots of my soul come a gentle coercion, and I ran my hand over a strange inversion, a vacancy that just did not belong. The child is gone. And I mean, what a brilliant description of the heaviness and acceptance of like the way you grow into being an adult. Like that tumultuous upheaval is so confusing and heavy, and it is a silent, like, isolating process. I mean, you really, really, I mean, if you can benefit from being, I mean, Fiona's obviously an introvert. So being alone was something that I think was quite powerful for her, actually, and empowering. And after her first real relationship, like realizing that maybe, chasing the next thing isn't what needs to happen right away now, that there is definitely a silence that needs to be heard, an absence that needs to be felt. And I can empathize so much with this at my age right now. I feel as though the last several years I have been trying to reconcile or catch up with or deal with, the transition that I feel like I missed out on when I was a little younger and was a little bit late to the game with. And so now at 27, I'm still kind of going through this same sort of upheaval of transitioning from childhood to adulthood. I know it sounds crazy. It's like I'm 27, but there are certain things that just, they take so long to shed off. And you do, I mean, as she says, you do feel like a stranger to yourself, because you find yourself truly alone, and you fully know what that feels like and means for the first time. Because up until this age, I mean, if you're, lucky to grow up with family and things, you never fully feel that isolation until it comes crashing down on you. But it is such an important experience to have. But it can be make or break, and I can definitely sense that. I mean, this is a call for help in a lot of ways, and I really do. I mean, I know that Fiona has struggled with mental health, and I know that that reflects in her music, and that's what draws me to her, even if sonically it's not always my style. I want to see how she is using her art to not only kind of expose the dirtier secrets of her mental issues, but and the struggles she faces with depression and with sexual assault, like all of those things coming to the surface in a way that she can so maturely talk about at such a young age. And that's still, I just keep coming back to, because there's a wisdom to her lyrics that I don't think you tend to get until you're at least my age or older. So yeah, she really does feel like a 30-year-old trapped in a 16-year-old's body here. And that's a good thing, because it's going to, it's going to really prepare you so much better for the onslaught of emotions that come at you in your 20s. Track number 9, Pale September. I think I'm fully sold on Fiona at this point. There, sonically is not a whole lot of change up in tempo in all of these songs. So sonically, they kind of do start to blend together. But even on a first listen, they still jump out at me, because I instantly am looking at the lyrics and the so effortlessly poetic nature she describes, the passing of time, the concept of dealing with loss, life moving forward as seasons. Time uses this metaphor for, healing and rebirth, metamorphosis, so many heavy concepts, so elegantly wrapped up and displayed here in the lyrics that I'm just very, very much enamored by, and I feel very touched and spoken to. And when she says he, I'm not entirely sure, it's sort of like in verse 2, he goes along just as a water lily, gentle on the surface of his thoughts. His body floats, unweighed down by passion or intensity, yet unaware of the depth upon which he coasts. And he finds a home in me, for what misfortune sows, he knows my touch will reap. I interpret that he as not necessarily being like a literal romantic partner of hers, even though it could be, but more as like a metaphorical way of describing like this Arcadian bird, or maybe a frog, like this image of idyllic contentment, the embodiment of peace, and elegance, floating along the water, and underneath the surface, turning their feet but not knowing that there's so much depth that they are coasting by on. And in a way, she's sort of wishing she could be like that, wishing she could be so, like a water lily, floating upon the surface and not being weighed down or sinking below it. All my armor falling down in a pile at my feet, and my winter giving way to warm as I'm singing him to sleep. And so, again, this is where, if it's dealing with loss, I'm not sure if she's, possibly referencing someone, she's a loved one she's possibly lost when she's saying him. But again, I take it as like this very much kind of like archetypal image of time himself, and life itself as well. Like there's kind of giving that he pronoun. Um, when she comes to music and uses that as sort of like this therapeutic release, in a way, I think she's kind of painting the image of how that long dark winter for her, that she's had many times, but maybe she's referencing in particular the one that she recently went through before this album was put out, talking about how cold and dark things got and how music was rising like the moon to shine a light for her so that she could eventually come back and warm things up and come out of winter into a warmer place. The final track, Carry On, I think it echoes the opening track sonically of Sleep to Dream. We definitely pick up a little bit more instrumental alt rock vibe. Towards the end of the song, we definitely get that, guitar breakdown, which breaks up the acoustic feel of the acoustic guitar we've been getting for quite so many tracks, and the smooth jazz feel. And so melodically, again, not a huge standout for me. Reminds me of Sleep to Dream sonically. But I, once again, am just in awe of the lyrical content, describing the issues in a relationship where the love is fading, but you don't want to like necessarily do anything about it because you feel bad about it. But there's also no way this could be possibly salvaged. Won't do no good to sing no love song. No sound could simulate the presence of a man. Won't do no good asking no questions. Your divination should acquaint you with the plan. It's like, you should know, you should be able to read between the lines that I'm not into this anymore. Please, why do I have to be the one to bring this up? Are you okay with just coasting along and letting things decay and just not really caring, but not also wanting to change things, make us better? That happens in a lot of relationships. I mean, people get very comfortable being uncomfortable, or they get very comfortable with not really being in love with each other, but they're still together, and they don't want to. Maybe there's a lot of shame and guilt from family or from friends and just themselves that makes them want to keep it together because, you know, that's what society would ideally want us to do. But oh, honey, I've gone away. I've mentally checked out. And this whole album, like I said, is dripping with that sarcasm that I think Emily Autumn does brilliantly with, Sarah Bareilles, Nora Jones, Alanis. I think that, Fiona was the prototype for so many of these artists. And I really do. I'm so grateful and glad that I'm finally getting into her music. Is this an album I'm going to be listening to all the time? No. I mean, Sullen Girl is still the most memorable to me after listening to a lot of these songs for the first time, but that's just because of its, the fact that I've been familiar with it for some time. But there are definitely, moments where I think this album could definitely be fully length, played through to process through some heavy emotions post breakup. And I definitely see certain songs. Never is a Promise would be almost my favorite, if not Sullen Girl, because of the replay value for me and the familiarity. But Never is a Promise may usurp that as my favorite song on this record. And Sleep to Dream is still, I think, quite a memorable track, and one that I think is pretty well composed. And also Pale September, The First Taste. There's something about The First Taste, it just paints a picture almost too close to home for me. And those songs for me are the standouts. I mean, it's a great body of work, I think, for a debut artist. That this album deserved all of the positive accolades and positive critical acclaim that it got, because it was really a hallmark in songwriting. And I think that so many of the artists that I do really love listening to, like Sarah Bareilles, yeah, there's so much of a prototype in this that I think that set the stage for just being even more unapologetic. I mean, female artists have been unapologetic in music before this, but this album, but I think that she really stepped up the game. I really think she did with this record. And I'm glad that it was mainstream, even if she sort of, after this record, sort of stopped being mainstream. This was sort of her only moment. I think a lot of people are a little bit worried or think that Billie Eilish might have a similar sort of story in a way, and that Billie Eilish will never be quite as successful as her first album. And, sort of that's the story of Fiona Apple in a way. But Fiona still has, I mean, Billie will always have fans. Fiona still has such a market and an audience that is eager to listen. It's just, mainstream pop, like, forget about it, right? Like, we don't need to pay attention to what they want to pay attention to. So yeah, I'm really glad I got into this. Let me know in the comments, what are your favorite songs? What are your thoughts on this record? I do plan on doing more Fiona on this channel. My original plan was to review this album and then also to review her 2005 album, Extraordinary Machine. Someone pointed out that as another album that they thought was worth me diving into. But there is, of course, her 1999 album, When the Pawn, which I might look into as well. And then there's the 2012 album, The Idler Wheel. That one, I just got to be honest, is the one I'm probably the least likely to cover. But, like, never say never. Never is a promise, right? No, never say never, because I will potentially, down the line get to that. And definitely interested to hear more of her music, even though you got to be in the right mood for it sometimes. But it definitely lives up to that album cover, I think, in that it's upfront expose dealing with stuff that needs to be dealt with. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. Thank you all so much for watching. I will link my review of Fetch the Bolt Cutters in my description, so you can check that out. And subscribe if you are new here and you enjoyed this. I will see you all in my next video. Peace, love, and light. Bye.